what is critical there is that when you go back into an area where you were previously using, other people don't really want you to get well. Because if you are sober and well, it proves that it's possible. And if it's possible, they have a responsibility to try for that too. And so it's easier for that old community to watch you fail so that they can think, why would I even try? It's just not possible, rather than to turn around and make the investment themselves because of what you have proven you're capable of.
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
Okay, everyone, welcome to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. Really excited you're here listening, hanging out with us, and super excited for this week's episode. We've got Kelly Lyndgaard from Unshattered in New York with us this week. And I met Kelly sometime in the past year. We've really gotten to know each other this year in 2022 and connect, and have just really appreciated so much about what they're doing. As I talk to organizations, meet organizations, I'm always pressing in on their philosophy around program and who they're helping and how they're doing that. And Kelly just crushed it on all those answers, and it was super interesting. And she's like a powerhouse businesswoman that came from the corporate world and is now doing this awesome work. And so I'm just really excited for her to share her story and what Unshattered's doing and all this stuff. And yeah, really excited about that. So Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It is really great to be here. I respect your work tremendously. We run in a lot of the same circles, and everyone I have run into that knows you has been so grateful for the work that you've done to advance the mission of their organization. And listen, just based on that nice setup that you gave me there, I'm already grateful for the opportunity to be here. So thank you.
We're excited about it as well. Yeah, totally. Well, cool. I'm excited to jump in because we got a lot to cover. Like, I want to know, we talked about it preparing, like, your faith and work journey and just like purpose and work journey, like how you went from an executive, like a high level performing business woman in the corporate world to this. I'm excited about the story of Unshattered. I want to dive into like the region you're in and all this stuff. So why don't we start with just a little bit of your story, like to that, and like where you came from and part of the story about you and just how you started Unshattered and what that shift was like.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not a place I ever thought that I would end up. I had a career in the tech industry, was an engineer and physicist by training, worked in corporate America for 16 years, worked my way up to an executive level and had plenty of runway from there. Loved my career and thought I would keep going until one day I happened to attend an event at my church that was kind of a women's Christmas event. And they had an organization there that night that they had supported financially for a long time, but had a few women come and speak that were in a local recovery program. And so I like to say that I walked in the door that night, the person who thought that people that were struggling with addiction just needed to get their act together and be more responsible and get a job and stop sticking a needle in your arm. Then I actually heard the story of some women in recovery and just completely changed my mind and my heart, realizing how arrogant, really, and judgmental I had been and unaware of my own privilege. And so the woman who spoke that night had been 8 years old when her journey of addiction started. She was raised by a single mom who was ill and in bed a lot. 15-year-old neighbor thought it would be funny to get an 8-year-old high. And it did not take long for her life to unravel into addiction and homelessness. And I just was like, I'm sorry, what? This is such a different story than I ever understood it to be.
Yeah. Oh man. I think that's like, it's an interesting journey when you like recognize either like, I'm trying to think the right words. Like, I don't necessarily want to say privilege, but kind of privilege, but just when your eyes are open to something. I think I noticed I go through a cycle where at first I'm like, whoa, like I had some like just misconceptions about this. I think about when I first started like thinking through like racial oppression in the US and stuff. And like, just, I hadn't, I think everyone hits that at a certain point. They think about those things. You're like kind of like guilty about it, but not guilty about it. And then you want to do something about it. And then you're like researching a little, you're like diving in, you're kind of mad at everyone else for not understanding it. I think like where I've arrived now is like, no, it's just like a cycle. And like, and I'm curious where you land on that too. Cause it's like, now I'm not necessarily mad at someone else for not understanding it. I'm like, well, that was exactly where I was. Like it's almost like until you're exposed to something and you're like burdened with it, you're not going to be there. And so I don't know how you've wrestled with that. Like now that you're deep in it, like you're like, oh, well, I have a responsibility to go now tell people about that, because that's part of their journey and different things.
Yeah, absolutely. It was that transformation from really understanding that addiction is a story of pain. It's not a story of substance, and just not having a clue about trauma that people have experienced, particularly in their childhoods. And the women have taught me that drugs and alcohol were not the problem initially. They were the solution to a different problem of pain. And I'm grateful I was shielded from a lot of that in my life, but also it made me very naive about the things that other people had faced. And then you're right, you start to carry this burden, not just for the people that you serve, but for trying to get other people to see the world differently in the way that my own thinking has shifted. And part of that is, again, it's not about the substance. We are all in recovery from something. It is just this process of being able to be honest about who we are and how we've been hurt. And I'm going to tell you, in the last couple of years, it has just sort of occurred to me that I am woundable, I am wounded, and I am wounding to others. And I think it takes a lot for all of us to own that. And sometimes covering up our wounding looks a lot like being a high achiever in some other arenas.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Trauma and mental health is like so much the source of so much of the problems we have as like a culture and society. But then I've had 2 or 3 conversations recently where I was talking to someone, and because I operate in this world and I get to have conversations with people like you all the time and stuff, I start to think like everybody recognizes the fact that trauma and mental health is such a big problem. And then I've had 2 or 3 conversations recently with someone where they're like totally hadn't recognized that that's a thing yet. Or they're like, why would I ever go to counseling? Like, I'm not weak or something. And I was like, well, I don't know. I can lift something heavy, but I've been to a lot of counseling. So it's so I think it's funny to recognize like, okay, are we culturally, I think we're shifting to understand that better. We still have a lot of a lot of ways to go. But then I think too about like culturally and geographically, and we're going to touch on the Hudson Valley a little bit, like, how Denver experiences, the culture of a city like Denver or Colorado experiences that, and the West Coast might be different than the East Coast. And then we have a lot of international clients. So you go to someone, I was working with, talking to Jenny from Amani Collective this morning. And so they have like Mombasa, which is like a city urban region. And now they're opening their Turkana program, which is like super rural, tribal area up like north, and like how trauma and mental health looks for each of those groups, even in the same organization, is differently. So yeah, it's really interesting, but I think it is the core, like pain and trauma and stuff is like the core, of a lot of that stuff, which is just tough. So maybe that's a good segue, and we might go back to like your IBM, like your career and stuff later, but like, I think that's a cool segue. Talk about the Hudson Valley a little. Well, okay, before we do that, sorry, give me like a 30-second snippet of like, what is Unshattered? What do you guys do? We're going to unpack that later, but let's go there. And then I want to talk about the Hudson Valley specifically.
Yes. So Unshattered, we're a 501c3 nonprofit social enterprise, which means we have a product. So our mission is to end the addiction relapse cycle. What I witnessed as I started to understand this journey of addiction and watching women go through recovery programs is my respect for the work that they do to get to sobriety is just huge. That is a ton of emotional labor. And yet, at the end of that, they often maybe didn't have the chance to get an education, often don't have a background of employment, but most importantly, don't have a safe community to return to. And so the relapse rates are off the charts, as high, 80% plus, and often that leads to death. So we're losing 120,000 people a year in the US of an overdose death that is preventable. And yet there's really no alternative for them once they've completed recovery to go anywhere except for back where they started. So we are an employer that brings them in, trains them. They make handbags out of all upcycled materials. So things like retired military uniforms, the interior of the original 1955 Mercedes-Benz upholstery. We have a partnership with Southwest Airlines, upcycling the leather from their planes to give them a chance to get back on their feet economically and maintain their sobriety and really build their lifelong career, increase both their personal, professional skills, spiritual development. And so 10% of their paid hours go to things like therapeutic counseling, professional mentorships, educational workshops, and more, so that we can invest in helping them find their true potential and so they can grow to their highest capability.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I'm writing like 15 things down that I want to touch on because I'm really excited about it. So this is a staggering statistic for me that every time I hear it, I'm just like, it was one of those things that hit me. And I was like, wow, like the relapse rate, like share that statistic one more time so everyone just cements it. Like individuals who've gone through some form of rehab or addiction recovery, and maybe even talk through the cycle. Like when we say those words, like there's sober living facilities, there's rehab, there's like once you're out of rehab, then you're like in recovery, and then you relapse. Like share a little bit about like what that terminology is and what do we even like call those places, but also that statistic about the relapse and like which part of that cycle that's in, just for people who haven't really experienced that yet.
Yeah. And there's many, many pathways to sobriety. So I want to acknowledge that first and foremost, that people get there different ways. We partner particularly with women that have chosen to go to a year-long residential program. And so sometimes people sort of look at the end of our model and what our women are achieving. They've spoken at the White House. One of our women was named 40 under 40 business leader for our community last year. And so they're really excelling and achieving. And they assume, oh, these are people that their life just went off the rails a little bit. They had to get it back together. When in reality, you're not going to choose to go into a 365-day program unless you've got some serious problems and you really need to get it straightened out. And so our women are coming from homelessness, incarceration, prostitution, the overlap for all of that is the addiction cycle. And as I got introduced to this story of addiction and recovery and sobriety and what does that mean, even though there's some incredible programs that we partnership, great success rates, overall, you look at people go into a recovery program, come out of the program, again, maybe don't have education for the most part, don't have a job history for the most part, but the most important piece is that safe community. And so I'll give you an example of a woman that I knew during her 12-month program, worked super hard, was a great leader, high achiever, did these amazing things, worked so hard on her sobriety, gets to day 365 at her completion. Her mom comes to celebrate her year of sobriety and all her work in the program. They get in the car to drive. And before they are at the end of the driveway, her mom turns and hands her a crack pipe. After she just came to her celebration of completing the sobriety program. And it took me a little bit to figure out, but I think what is critical there is that when you go back into an area where you were previously using, other people don't really want you to get well. Because if you are sober and well, it proves that it's possible. And if it's possible, they have a responsibility to try for that too. And so it's easier for that old community to watch you fail so that they can think, why would I even try? It's just not possible, rather than to turn around and make the investment themselves because of what you have proven you're capable of.
Yeah.
So I thought our model has shifted several times, because in the beginning, I thought it was like, hey, if we trained them on some job skills when they were in the program, they're more prepared. When they go back, they can get a job. That didn't work.
Yeah.
Then I thought, well, if we just give them a little more runway. So we started with 6-month internships for a while of like, they just need a little more stability. They just need a little more time. At the end of 6 months, still go back to that old community. And it still wasn't working until we realized that we have to solve for the long term. And that means community, housing, employment, job skills, relationships, So like childcare, all of those things that we're constantly trying to strengthen our model, to just give this women the runway to figure it out for the long term and not relapse, just to break that cycle that they find themselves in and can't get out of.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, man, it's just so crazy. It's like that story. Cause you actually, the first time we talked, you shared that story with me. About halfway through you sharing it, I was like, oh, I know how this ends. And it's great. Well, and I think I want to get back to the safe community in a second, but I think there's one of the things that made me think about was I've just noticed, we talked about this earlier when we were preparing, like trying to like over spiritualize anything, but I think for like, there's spiritual strongholds with people, like each individual person, like me as an example, like there's certain just spiritual strongholds that places and people have that just like bring out the worst in me or like parts in me. And so like, I have no desire to go back to like the town that I grew up in. And there's some like weird, just like stronghold. Like I just feel like I enter back into like, you know, and there's a lot of mental health there and nostalgia. Like there's so much to say. We don't have to like deconstruct all the psychology of that, but I think just recognizing like that's a thing too, you know? And so, you know, you could have like, I could be totally one person in Colorado and then I go back and hang out with X person or do X thing. And it's like, you're like right back, which is just like crazy that as humans, like we can shift like that. And, and I think the important thing there is just like recognize like that's a reality. And so we all are kind of susceptible to that. And I hope everyone's kind of like, oh yeah, that's this example. I think we're
You go back to your parents' kitchen table, you're going to be 12 years old again.
Totally. Right. Isn't that crazy? You're like, I'm an adult, like 99% of my life. Why am I acting this way?
Why is my brother getting under my skin in that way? I am a mature adult woman.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, which is interesting. Yeah. Well, and the other thing, like of the, you know, we've worked with a handful of organizations in helping individuals in recovery and social enterprise and stuff, Spring Back here in Colorado, Mile High Workshop, and a bunch of other ones. And the number one successful thing that I've seen for a lot of them has been, obviously there's a lot of infrastructure and programmatic and like therapy, like just pieces of that puzzle that like make sense. But the community piece, like the ones that are really successful are the ones that they have a safe community, a thriving community. People feel like they're part of a family. And that is super hard to maintain, especially as a founder, like, because what I've seen is like when people first start one of those organizations, they're deep in it. You're there every day. You're doing this, like you can create that family. You have a really close like pulse on it. And then as the organization grows and scales, one of the tough things, maybe you're experiencing this now or you have in the past, like one of the tough things, like you're off at the speaking event, you're transitioning that. And so I've seen a lot of organizations experience that scaling and say, oh, like, how do we keep this community that's really important, like present and transition that to other team members and stuff. And so I've seen it done well, but I think that community piece is really important because you even said earlier, like people, maybe you said this when we were preparing, like people feeling like they belong to a community is like probably one of the number one things that they fall back on in the hard times, more than a theology or a philosophy or something that they've gotten. Like that community really like brings them into it for that season, which is cool.
Yeah. Some language that I've been thinking a lot about recently is describing us as an employment community, which is different than just community, right? Because it implies the expectation first of your performance as an employee is your ticket in the door, right? And so first thing, you have to adhere to these standards of expectation from an employer.
Love that.
Is what gets you in the door. And then we build good community around that. And so sometimes I have found that there are people who want to be a part of the Unshattered community, but they do not want to work at Unshattered. That does not work. Right? Yeah. And also sometimes they want to move on from Unshattered for all kinds of good reasons, career growth, opportunity, whatever. And so they also want to retain that community piece. So we are just on the cusp of scaling and moving into a much larger facility that has some opportunity for things like a daycare on campus for the women. It used to have a part of a fitness center in it. So there's some locker rooms on the campus. There's some acreage where, you know, we kind of envision just some space of mental health and development and kind of chapel area, those things. So we've started to think really hard about what does it mean for people to be part of our community for a long time, even if they may not be an employee? And so we're wrestling through, what are we building this thing for? If you move on to another job because we've helped you grow your skills, positioned you to really drive up your income, we can't offer every skill set in the universe, right? So if we can help you find your strengths and move on to places where you have more growth opportunities, but you want to retain this community that's been really meaningful, what does it look like for our facility to also be a place where the community is for a lifetime?
Yeah.
So we've started to put some thought into this model of like the employment relationship, the community relationship, which in the beginning of the journey is 100% overlapped, but over a lifetime, not necessarily. And then there's, I think, a third circle in there of friendships. So there's employment, community, and friendships. And they might not all intersect perfectly. Somewhere there's kind of a sweet spot in the middle, but you might be a team lead with somebody that has been your friend for a long time. And that can be tricky when you're now holding them accountable for their work. And so what do those relationships look like? And how do we create good boundaries, good clarity, good expectations of what's within the rights of the business to expect from you? What's your personal life that we may encourage you towards, but authority for decision making? And then what's sort of outside that realm at all that we don't get any input on? It's been interesting to think through those.
In some ways, well, and the part you didn't say there is what happens when a hand grenade gets thrown right into the middle of all that, because as a social enterprise, you're saying, look, like if we were just like 8 VPs of HR at a couple different corporations, we could be saying, hey, like, here's some expectations, and here's, theoretically everyone is like healthy in these ways, and this is what's going to happen. And so we could build that. In reality, you guys always have to leave room to say, yeah, but that's going to blow up in our face, and we have to be okay with it, because we can't make it super black and white, because you need it to be black and white enough to encourage and support people and challenge them without it being so black and white that failure isn't okay. Right. Because like, that's a natural part of the process, which is super hard. It's one of the reasons why, like, there's certain, because we work with organizations like in all those different realms, addiction, like homelessness, all these things. And there's certain ones where I'm like, I would have a really hard time being the founder of a social enterprise in this area. Sometimes it's because my burden for it is so high that I can't even function around it. Like for some reason, like rural America, elderly, like makes me like super sick. Like I just like can't, it just affects me now. But I'm like, it's not something I'm like inspired to, or it's not something I would go like solve. Right. And then there's some where I'm like, I would just be really bad at that. So just interesting thinking through like, those tensions. I think as I've talked to you and gotten to know you, Kelly, like it seems like you're like very poised to like, this is your lane of like dealing with that tension, which is really cool. But the other thing I was going to say is like what you were describing there is a little bit of like an alumni network for a college where you're like kind of what you guys are wrestling with. What's our alumni network look like? Because there's some people who are going to stay in our city and they're going to be involved and they're going to come to stuff. There's some people who are going to go on and get an MBA and they're just going to add an extra year and a half onto their undergrad and they're going to stick around. There's, people that are going to move across the country, but they're still part of it. Maybe we need an alumni chapter in Colorado because there's enough of them there. And maybe people will just be friends and that's fine. And maybe they'll circle back in 10 years and like at the same company and they'll be like, oh, cool. And so, really, as you were describing that, I was just thinking about Marquette, where I went to school. I was just thinking about the layers of the alumni network and emails I get and people I know. And like someone I didn't talk to since college, like we live in the mountains here in Colorado. And he saw on Facebook when we were moving out here, which like small town. And he's like, hey, we actually live in Bailey. This is crazy. We hadn't talked for like 6 years and now we're like friends and play basketball together and all this stuff. And so I just, as you were describing, I was like, yeah, I think there's like a place for all that stuff. And it's really like, how do you manage that in different ways? And I think but I do think it's really important because, as people move on, seasons of life are just going to happen and they're going to need to tap into that network or not tap into it and things. And I wonder if there's any like cool, I wonder if some like association of colleges like have an alumni thesis that they've written
right.
that would be cool for you to read and like build it off of or something.
Right.
It's important for metrics too, as a social enterprise, for you to be able to say, hey, like 5-10 years people that were in our program 5-10 years ago, here's where they're at, and here's what they've struggled with, and here's where they've thrived, and here's the percentage that have kept in touch. Like, that's great for fundraising and different things too. So selfishly, it's fun to have that.
It is. It's an interesting problem to think about, because what our definition of success is. For me, it's not just, have they maintained sobriety? Have they kept a job? Like all those sort of predictors of safety, I'll say.
Yeah.
But really, truly what success for me is, have they learned how to learn and how to build the resources to move their life in the direction they want to move it? So it's, do they know how to build relationships? Do they know how to find mentors? Do they know how to create community around them? Yeah. And if they know how to do those things, they do not need us anymore, and they can go do that anywhere 100%. In the world.
Like all those intangibles.
Right.
Yeah. You sound like a new agey homeschool parent, which is like how I talk. Honestly, it's how I talk half the time. I'm like, well, here's how because it's how I talk. I'm like, yeah, I've heard myself say those same things about like, I think we might homeschool because like the school system like teaches them this, but not that. And that's not really going to help them. And I'd rather them learn. I was like, oh man, that sounds like the same kind of thing.
I'm going to tell you that is the first time I've been called that.
Yeah. Well, it's not a bad thing. It's I don't think it's a bad thing. I think what you're saying is like, traditionally the way we think people grow to be successful in life is a lot like, and what I'm saying is like a lot like our school system, where it's like, oh, well, check these boxes, pass this test, do this thing. It's like, well, okay, you can be that person and not get anywhere. And then you can be the person that dropped out of middle school and you're a successful entrepreneur. And so like, what are the things that actually lead to people being successful in life and relationships? And that's what you guys are focused on. I think it's cool. And I do think that's like we don't have to go there. Like I think that's part of the education crisis right now in America, and like why a lot of people are homeschooling and why there's like charter schools popping up and all that stuff. So you can like say that's what you've now entered into that category a little bit, maybe.
I'm just laughing because I don't have kids. So that is not in my frame of reference at all.
Totally. The struggle is very real when you talk about that. Anyways, that's a whole other conversation we need to have I need to have on the podcast at some point.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, I want to take a quick break from today's episode and just share a little bit about Impact Foundation, who's got an incredibly awesome model of using impact investment, charitable dollars, and funding tons of projects all over the world right now. But what if your investments could change the world? At Impact Foundation, they believe business with purpose has the power to transform society. Purpose-built for impact investing, Impact Foundation provides a streamlined way to fund businesses that seek social and spiritual transformation or make loans to charity, all while earning a financial return to grow your giving. Donors and investors have already supported more than 200 redemptive enterprises through their impact accounts. They provide needed fuel for companies that exist as a force of God's redemptive work in the world. To learn more about what they're doing in their kingdom impact investing model, visit impactfoundation.org. So one other thing that I wanted to talk about that I had a note here, you talked about how a certain percentage of the time that do you refer to like as like participants, as employees? Like what?
Okay.
Employees. So every organization defines it differently. So a certain percentage of your employees' time is reserved for different things that they might need that you described earlier. And so one of the interesting tensions of social enterprise, and I'm curious how you've wrestled with this so that other founders can hear it, and even people maybe looking to fund certain projects and things, like in order to be a for-profit, fiscally sustainable, profitable model, you don't want your employees spending time on things that aren't working, because all of a sudden it starts to go upside down. And so there's some organizations that I know that they can function and get it, to, hey, we're fully profitable and we're having our people do 10% of their time as program. There's some organizations that say, hey, the population we're dealing with, maybe they're just coming out of, I think Mile High Workshop is more this way, like they're getting a lot of individuals just coming out of incarceration or homelessness addiction, like a lot closer to that kind of point. And so they have a higher percentage, I think, than you guys maybe do, that someone is maybe in addiction therapy or different things, or group therapy. And so for them, like hitting profitability might be even harder. Where have you guys landed on that? How have you wrestled with that? I mean, you're coming from the business world. You're like, this is how it is. Now you're looking at a P&L and you're like, why doesn't this work? And should I raise my prices? And it doesn't make sense to raise our prices in this. So we'll have to fundraise, but I care about it. It's such an interesting thing. So I'm just curious your journey on that, where you guys have landed, what you've learned, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, listen, I'm just going to acknowledge at first that it is a tough equation to close, certainly for any business that's trying to do that, even a for-profit company, right?
Yeah.
I look back at my days in the tech world, and there were significant investments made in me in terms of my education and business development and training opportunities. And, that's a privilege that I had that a lot of people don't get to have in their career. And a lot of small companies just can't afford to do it. So a couple levers that we have is, given the fact that we're using all upcycled materials, we have low product costs except for the wages that it takes to make it. And so we account for that when we do our evaluation of pricing or margin or whatever. We don't do contract manufacturing for high volume products. We often get asked to do, can you sew this shirt for my brand? Or can you make this bag for my brand? Or that is just not our business model, because we're too expensive. That overhead burden of their education and development is part of our per hour cost. Sometimes we have small brand partnerships who really are invested in the mission. They understand that it's going to cost them more to work with us. And so there is some opportunity for us, but it's part of the product cost for us, which we offset by using material that we don't pay for because it's headed for a landfill and free to us. And we're able to upcycle that and make something amazing out of it. Their work is program. So even though 10% of that time is going to things like therapeutic counseling and education and things sort of outside their proper day-to-day job, we view that job in and of itself as program. So our women are not just seamstresses with the company. I'm currently the only one in the company that's not in recovery. And so almost everything top to bottom is run by women in recovery. The design of the product, quality control, customer relationships, the whole e-commerce platform, photography, all of that. We're giving the women on our team the opportunity to continually learn, grow their skills, and to create higher value roles for themselves. Even we always laugh that one of our first lessons is you sew something and it's not going to go well the first couple times, but their first reaction is typically cry and throw it out. But the lesson is, here's a seam ripper. Like, you take that seam out, you figure out what you did wrong, you back up and you try it again. And so trying to find those metaphors for the lessons of life in the actual work is a high priority for us. And then part of that too is we work from donations to help offset some of the costs. And so we have partners who really want to invest in that piece of our work. And we think about that income through the lens of the durability of their investment. Right. So I often use that sort of analogy of it in a little bit different way of like, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, except somebody has to give him a fishing pole. And so that is how we see ourselves, of like, it doesn't do you any good to know how to do it if you don't have a fishing pole and a stocked pond. So we truly are trying to give the women the skills, the place, the opportunity, the resources, the social capital, and the belief that they can succeed.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I think that's super helpful just for anyone wrestling through that to hear, because it's not a black and white thing where everyone's going to end at the same place. And I know people that I know founders of social enterprises that there's a reality of where they're going to land by who they work with and how they're set up. And it just drives them nuts for the 15, 20 years that they're like, man, my conviction is to want to be this, but I know that this is the right way to do it. And so I'm going to land here. And so I think just hearing those stories is really fruitful and really helpful. So thanks for sharing that. I'm going to start shifting gears quite a bit here as we kind of finish up our time with some other things I want to talk about. One is, you talked a little bit about like custom work and the bags you guys are doing, some of the partnerships you're doing. There's a term like artisan craft goods. And I think it's an interesting term, and it's one that I've gotten yelled at for using before, because there's some people that they're like, yep, we do kind of artisan craft goods. We go into this rural area in Central America or South America or Africa or somewhere, and there's women that make these things or whatever. And then there's there's a spectrum, right? And so there's that, and then it comes over and it goes to your church, and the church sells it on a day or something. And yeah, that's one version. And then there's kind of like a high end product, like an e-commerce product or something, where we're doing some sort of like what Amani calls it, ethically sourced artisan home decor. But there's a mentality there of like, do that at a high level. So you talked about the 3 secrets of your bags and the custom work. And I think you guys pursue, you're not marketing and branding yourselves as hey, yeah, we're like a product to sell, but you've kind of taken that as like a premier brand at the same time. So talk to me a little bit about how you guys have defined that, how you've wrestled with it, how you've created a brand that is a premium brand, how you share that with your employees and the women working there, what that journey's been like.
Yes, that is a complex question. We have worked really hard to position ourselves as a premium prestige brand, which means trying to show up with an incredible quality product and an incredible customer experience all the time. My goal is that when you think of Disney World or Ritz-Carlton for hospitality and customer experience, I want Unshattered to be the brand that somebody thinks of when they think of a high-end social enterprise. But we constantly, like the second I say that we're 501c3, people expect hand stitched, like, oh, I'll buy this thing because I really love the mission and I want to help out and I'll probably never use it. Like, and then what happens is people show up and they're like, whoa, these bags are amazing. This is great quality. As we've moved more and more into some larger wholesale accounts and things, the feedback, listen, I want to put you on the shelves in my prestige category. Like, I need you to be along the best brands in my store. And I feel really proud of our work in constantly chipping away at that. And let me tell you, that is no small task. But it's because, first of all, I believe that our team is capable of it. I find it meaningful for these women who have come from a background of addiction, incarceration, homelessness, et cetera, not just for them to believe in their very high potential, but to create that moment of contrast that I had the very first time I met Emily, who told that story, and finding this beautiful woman in front of me who is speaking in a room full of women who looks to have her life together. And then she tells the story that I'm like, what? And the more that you sort of reveal this contrast to people of like, I almost can't believe this woman in front of me who is professional and accomplished and making this beautiful product, and this other thing is true about them too. Being able to reconcile that and realize it's true about all of the people around us. That every time we speak to an audience, I'm going to say at least 80% of the audience, probably way more, but at least 80% of the audience has somebody very close to them recently experiencing addiction. And on the average, at least 20% of the audience will come up afterwards and be like, me too, I've been there.
Yeah.
And the more we crack that open, the more we realize, forget the issue being addiction, we're all in recovery from something. And when we can own that and connect in our humanity and be gentle, that we all just keep reaching for something to soothe that pain and fill the gap, I think we all get to love each other a whole lot better. But it's really important for the prestige of the quality of product to help us tell that story, that everybody has potential and possibility. And also, I say to the team all the time, the quality of the product that we put on the shelf is telling the customer the quality of program that we have and the quality of life that you're living. And so they're going to draw conclusions based on what we put out there about the actual work that we're doing behind the scenes. And it's really important to communicate how hard we work at the things that we're committed to.
Yeah. Oh man, I love all of that answer in every possible way. So we're just going to leave that as it is. Maybe this podcast episode could be titled "We're all recovering from something," because I think that's totally
Yes.
true and it's awesome. And man, I think everybody can resonate with that. And it's yeah, again, it's not a black and white thing. It's something for every brand to wrestle with, because you've probably had certain product runs where quality has been rough, or certain seasons where it has been, and you've had to like wrestle with the tension of like, okay, it's not going to be as good as I want it to be, but it's still premium. But if we throw out the whole order, here's what that says to the employees and what they're experiencing. And yeah, tough, but what a good like kind of approach to it.
Yeah. And it's, that you have to blend that with the culture of learning, which means you have to fail first. You can't learn unless you fail first. If you didn't fail first, you already knew it. Then that's not called learning. That's called demonstrating.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And so we often, one of the principles is not perfect, but best effort.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
And
totally.
We can get a little perfectionistic about like that one thing is not that perfect, and remind ourselves that it is handcrafted. The customer is not expecting perfection, but they are expecting quality and attention to detail and thoughtfulness and best efforts in our work, which means a really solid, amazing bag that they are going to be proud to carry. And that gives them the opportunity to showcase their belief in our work.
Yeah. Awesome. Very cool. Okay. I think this is really interesting for you, coming from just the corporate tech world and stuff. I'd be really curious, like, kind of quickly to share what's been your biggest learning. And maybe you already shared it and this is just refocusing it, but as a, again, a high performing corporate individual in the tech world, moving into the nonprofit space, but a social enterprise, having employees of your own, like this has been a journey. And so what's been your biggest, most cool learning? What's been the biggest challenge that you've faced so far that you'd kind of share?
I think the biggest learning, which I would say is my mindset shift of viewing people that were struggling, like I said in the very beginning, of like, you just need to get it together and be more responsible and try harder. That worked for me, to realizing that this is truly the most talented, creative, hardworking, problem-solving, tender, committed group of people that I've ever had the chance to work with. And, I came from a career where I worked with some of the smartest people in the world. But this group of women is just incredible, an incredible Amazing. Group of people to have the privilege to work with. And coming at that from a position of trying to be the tension between being a safe community and giving people the opportunity to choose to succeed, and yet always asking them to take that step forward for more. Like that's the tension for me, is so hard doing that in a really, healing centered, thoughtful way that also says, keep going. There's more for you.
Well, and that's the thing too, that doesn't ever, I don't think you ever nail that. There's no formula, because every human's unique. You get better at it, but there's always outliers. It's always, and so it's very pastoral in a sense, where there's just not a formula, and that's just a burden of it that's intentionally carried, and but one of the most important parts, but super challenging. Cool. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing those. Those are super cool.
Yeah, sure.
What is one other thing I wrote down, you said something earlier, like the 3 secrets of your bags.
Right.
And I had it as a note here to talk about. We haven't touched on it yet. So before we kind of close out, like what's the 3 secrets?
Yeah. So let me tell you a little about the product. I said they're made from upcycled material. So we like to say that those handbags are a metaphor for the lives of the women that make them. Something that was perceived as discardable and without purpose, remade into something beautiful, purposeful. And then we incorporate 3 secrets in each of our bags. So just trying to be the details of our design to, again, reflect the quality of our work. So every single bag that we make is named after somebody that we know of that's still struggling with addiction. So as it moves through our production line, as the woman who kits the bag cuts it, as the team sews it, as it goes through quality control and then into the hands of a customer, we let them know that it has a name on that individual bag that is somebody that we know of that's still struggling with addiction, that we hope and pray finds healing like the women on our team have. There's a secret message inside the liner of every bag. You can't see it when you purchase it, but something meaningful from the artisan who made it, their number of days of sobriety, a song lyric, a verse, something meaningful inside the bag.
Super cool.
Yeah, the third is a gold seam somewhere on the bag, which is our nod to the Japanese art form of Kintsugi, which uses gold to heal the cracks and broken pottery. And that form of mending vases and other shattered objects was so beautiful that it became a form of art. The term Kintsugi means more beautiful for having been broken.
Oh, that is awesome. I'm so glad I didn't forget to ask that question. That's like super cool. And I started to see a little bit of where Unshattered came from.
There you go. One other thing that we do that's pretty cool is we do bags from family heirlooms. So we do made to order, which is our fabric, your design. So if you see a bag that you like, but you're like, oh, I wish I had an extra pocket or was a little larger, or I might need my certain kind of laptop to fit in there, you can schedule an appointment in person or virtually with our employees to customize any bag and pick from our fabrics and make whatever changes in colors or size or pockets.
Super cool.
But we also do bags from family heirlooms. So if you have a wedding gown or a child's school uniform or a military uniform or a leather coat, we will turn that into a custom bag for you. So that's a super fun process. Everybody has something in a closet that they're never going to get rid of, but also is just going to hang in the closet for the rest of your life. We like to say we can turn your memories into something beautiful.
That's super cool. And when, as a male, and I'm going to get canceled for saying this, like, I don't think about bags as much, right? I don't have a lot of bags or things, but what kind are these, we should talk about this earlier, like handbags? You guys do duffel bags? Do you backpack? Like if I'm listening to that and I'm like, oh, well, I have my dad's leather jacket from when he passed away. That's what was kind of triggering for me, like what that might look like. You know, what kind of stuff can you guys make with that?
Yeah, so we do toiletry kits or like a dop kit for guys.
Oh yeah, cool.
We have any different styles of a laptop bag, like a big messenger bag you might take to work, or one with short handles that you would carry a laptop in, and then a crossbody strap, duffel bags, backpacks. We do smaller little zip pouch kind of things that a lot of guys like to just throw in a bag with your bills or all that kind of business.
Yeah. So, awesome. Super cool. That's great. That's awesome. Okay. Well, what's the future vision for Unshattered then as we close out? Like, what are you really excited about? What's on the horizon? What can people, and how do people find you, I guess, too?
So first of all, our website, unshattered.org. So you can find all of our products there, of course. We have a boutique in the Hudson Valley of New York, constantly changing our inventory. So follow us on the socials, because every 2 weeks we drop new products. And then we're about to expand. So we are just a couple of weeks away from purchasing a much larger building that will give us the opportunity to employ more women. We know that our model is working. We've been doing this for 6 years, and there's only been a single relapse for our employees, which is just incredible. So we want to do more of this work and then expand in a couple different ways. Part of that is building not just the community around the women that we're serving, but the community around us, and inviting them into this journey of healing and building relationships with people on that same journey, and also allowing us to expand the skill sets that we're offering the women on our team. So we'd love to eventually open up a small cafe or coffee shop. The property has an opportunity for us to potentially open an on-site daycare for our women, because we have found that we have a sweet spot. One of the programs that we partner with allows women to keep their kids with them when they come into recovery. And so to be able to partner and then offer employment at the tail end of that is an amazing resource that's not available in many places. So just thinking bigger about what community means, both for women in our program and the community around us, to build connection, purpose, and meaning in a way that moves us all towards growth.
Super cool. Yeah. And I'm excited about all that too. It's cool. we see and work with and interact with organizations at every stage of growth and struggle and everything in between. And so it's always cool to hear what you guys are excited about and how you guys are thinking through that stuff. So, well, Kelly, thanks for being on. It's been a ton of fun, and thanks for sharing your heart on all this stuff. I'm excited for everyone to be able to listen to this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really have appreciated the generosity of your time and thoughtfulness and your questions. And it's really exciting to become part of this community. You have an amazing audience. I'm looking forward to meeting more of them.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out, when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law, or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.